So it was while I was following my interest in the electric universe theory and listening to a web-based seminar at which Walt Thornhill was speaking that I first heard about Eric Lerner's work and his contribution to the electric universe research. This led me to buy a book he wrote in 1991, which, when I read it, gave me a firm impression of how the universe could have developed. It showed the physics and mathematics behind the construction of a plasma-filled universe, powered by an electrical force 1,000 million times more powerful than gravity, which inexplicably is still being blithely ignored by mainstream astronomical establishment. In that book, on page 243, he showed a focused fusion device, or plasma gun, to which he had been introduced in 1974. That's the plasma gun. You can see a central brass cylinder, and in this form of it, a complete cylinder around the outside, connected to a capacitor at the input, which is discharged from a very high voltage to produce that plasma effect. The plasma gun was invented independently in the early 60s by a Soviet gentleman by the name of Filipov and an American, Joseph Mather, and Eric compared its operation to the most powerful energy source in the universe, the quasar. Now, quasars are to be found at the centre of nearly all galaxies, and in the electric universe theory, they are the main power generating source of new stars within that galaxy. They are shown in photographs sending jets of ions and energy across 100,000 light years of space. Conventional astronomers call them black holes. That's what they look like. Now that looks very bright against the dark background, but that particular quasar is 1.4 thousand million light years from Earth, at the core of a normal spiral galaxy. And these quasars are several 100,000 million times brighter than normal stars. Now, Eric had calculated that while a quasar is only a single light year across itself, that's its diameter, a single light year, it generates more power than the average galaxy, which spans 100,000 light years. So it's tiny, and yet it's got this enormous power. Knowing that from his work with the electric universe theory, that the most useful feature of plasma is that it's totally scalable from laboratory dimensions to the size of galaxies. And he was able to scale down his calculations to find the power that would be produced by an 8-inch diameter plasma gun that he could build in his own laboratory. And the plasma gun gave him a possible solution to the problem he had, because he wanted to develop a fusion reactor without all the problems of conventional nuclear power stations using fission, and also without those of the infinitely complex and expensive tokamak fusion reactors being discussed and developed around the world. We're, of course, talking about the 80s. So anyway, it was logical that Eric had the idea to try and recreate the power of a quasar in a small fusion generating prototype in his laboratory. Now, this picture is the ITER tokamak. It's often called a donut, because that's the central shape is like that. And that's intended to capture a ring of plasma right on the centre. And that project was started in 1978 by the world leaders of the time, which happened to be Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev. They signed the agreement in 1978. It took them 3 years before the project actually started doing things. The plasma gun, by contrast with the tokamak, was elegant in its simplicity. That's an 8-story building high and very, very complex. And they don't even know when it is finished whether it's going to work in a way that they can use it. Whereas that has to force the issue. The plasma gun does it automatically, and every time it discharges a capacitor it does the same thing. But using his knowledge of physics, he looked into the different fusion reactions, and quite a few are possible. But he chose one using hydrogen and boron 11, because it had the unique ability to use a very low cost and abundant fuel type, hydrogen and boron. Both those elements are very common. Hydrogen obviously in water, easily extracted, and boron is one of the more plentiful things in the Earth's crust. Another reason was that it differs from all other possible choices in the ability to generate electricity directly and doesn't require the steam conversion that all other types of power generation do before you can make electricity with it. And it produces no radioactive waste or contamination. So in other words, he didn't want to be wearing a radiation suit in his laboratory, and it was nice and easy. The only snag was he had to go 10 times hotter than the tokamak, which the scientists of the day said impossible. Well, Eric founded his company, Lawrenceville Plasma Physics, based in Middlesex, New Jersey in '74, when he first started working on fusion, and LPP was eventually incorporated in 2003 as a commercial company to raise the capital to prove the concept and build or develop and build a practical focus fusion system. He also set up an online blog to promote his ideas of producing a focus fusion system, far less expensive than the tokamak type, which is being done at really a multi-billion pound cost. His online blog is called the Focus Fusion Society, which has an international membership and is an educational charity which educates its members and the public on fusion and provides a link to the current work of the Lawrenceville Plasma Physics company that's building it. His prototype research device, Focus Fusion 1, became operational on October 2009 and continues to make very good progress. In 2008, he resigned as CEO and webmaster of the Focus Fusion Society to concentrate his time on raising funds and developing that prototype using hydrogen and boron as its fuel. He's used standard nuclear physics for all his analysis, which shows the potential for fusion by this method, but it predicted that very high temperature, over 1 billion degrees, and this compares with only the 100,000 degrees needed for the deuterium and tritium reaction needed by the ITER tokamak project. Before that project started in '78, the experts considered it too difficult, and it was further thought that too much energy and temperature would be lost by its X-ray emission. The advantages of using the focus fusion technique with hydrogen boron are huge. I've mentioned it's very low cost, and the deuterium and tritium required by the ITER tokamak is really extremely expensive and in such short supply that the whole project would be useless if the reactor cannot make its own at the same time as producing its electrical energy. A mechanism that hasn't yet been proven, and it can't be proven until the ITER reactor works, and they haven't got it working yet. They think it'll take another 30 years before they will get it working. Well, at least they say it'll take that long to get into the grid. The next most important difference is that the output of the FF1 dense plasma focus device with hydrogen boron is in the form of a pulsed high power, an electric jet of ions and electrons which can be picked up directly by a copper coil around the jet. This provides a high efficiency conversion from the fusion device into electricity, 3 times more efficient than the conventional steam turbine, which would have to still be used by the ITER tokamak. And the final one, the FF1 system, its reaction is aneutronic. It doesn't produce neutrons, and therefore neutrons, when they hit anything, they produce radioactive products. And so in this case, he would have no waste disposal cost, no danger of contamination, and it's easily serviced without putting a radiation jacket on. Current state of his development. It's possible to keep a watch on these developments at LPP by registering with the Focus Fusion Society and receiving their monthly newsletter before it's publicly released. I've been watching these since the middle of last year and seen them develop every detail of their prototype. They find problems, they get over the problems, so it's been very nice to see someone developing something as advanced as that while it's happening. I can now go to the next slide. That's the inside of Eric Lerner's Focus Fusion. Instead of the outer cylinder, he's got rods, which is all you actually need. This is a view looking up at his plant, and the outside of that will later be covered by a big cylindrical dome, which enables it to have a vacuum put inside it before they fill it with hydrogen and boron gas. So that's a picture with the cylinder put on below with an inspection hatch so you can look through the side, and various access points for different things. You can take a very, very high-speed photograph through that window, and of course when they get fusion it develops quite a pressure inside, because the gas has to be pressurized to make it dense. That's the dense part of the dense focus fusion. An earlier picture shows the bank of capacitors rated at 50,000 volts each. On the top you can see those white switches, very high speed electronic switches, which they bought from one of the big companies, and they had a lot of trouble with them. They got the same pulse at the same time, but some worked late, and so he had to redesign the switches before he could get the whole thing working properly. This is another picture where it's all ready with some of the other monitoring equipment attached to it, ready for firing. Now this is the plasma and how it develops. When the capacitors discharge, it produces an umbrella-shaped pattern of plasma to the central electrode, and then because of the current flowing and magnetic forces that set up, it moves towards the front end of the gun. And this shows the same thing a little bit later, from top left to right. You can see it, the filaments that the umbrella shape develops into all converge together on the centre, and they end up producing what's called the plasmoid, which is bottom left. And you can see the individual filaments that come from the original umbrella, as it gets smaller and smaller because of the forces, the magnetic forces that compress it. When it gets below a certain size, it's heating up all the time, it starts fusion, and that's when you get to that bottom one. And looking back at the gun, and as you'd see it, it will suddenly shoot up this powerful jet of energy, which is pure electricity. It's a jet of electrons on one side and ions the other. And one goes inside the device, back to ground, but the electrons shoot straight out, go through a magnetic coil that picks them up, and that can be fed straight into a transformer, and by conventional electronic means it produces a very, very powerful burst of electrical energy.
Which can be stored?
Doesn't need to be. The ultimate intention of this device is to make it pulse like that 300 times a second. But all the experiments he's done so far are single pulses. But he's getting every pulse perfect and making sure that when he does 10 in a row, they're all the same amplitude and the same quality, doing the same thing. It's a brilliant piece of iterative development, following your nose and making it perfect, getting over whatever obstacles you find. One of the other reasons they thought this would not be a suitable way of doing fusion was they thought it would lose too much power through X-ray emission. But Eric has made the discovery that putting a coil around the outside and putting enough current through it, DC current, he can actually use it to control the amount of losses, and so he minimises the losses, and he's getting a very high conversion rate from the jet. This means that it will have less stray heat. He won't have to do so much cooling when he's running 300 times a second, and it's all looking very good. He's very close to optimal predicted performance now. He's measuring every pulse with a current transformer coil in the bottom, and that's how he can see that each pulse is giving the same power as the one before. He can also compare his results with the results of other engineers around the world who are doing similar experiments, not with exactly the same thing, but are all using the same technique. Oh yeah, this is a picture he took with his high-speed camera. You can see the left picture is the original plate, but then a close-up of the plasmoid. It shows the individual little bright spots and their separation distance. And still the individual filaments that came from the umbrella in that tiny thing, which is only 150 microns across. So it's three times the thickness of a hair on your head. That's the size of that jet. And pulses from that 300 times a second will produce 5 megawatt power. That's a graph comparing Eric Lerner's performance with other people's, and you can see from the red square that for the current pulse in kilo amps, that's thousands of amps going in, he's actually producing about 10 times more power than the other comparison we've got on that chart. So he's doing very well by comparison with all other researchers around the world. He sees that a device based on this, which he hopes to actually sell for £135,000 for 5 megawatts, you do divide one by the other, and you find that that is very much less expensive than solar cells or any other type of alternative energy we've got at the moment. And he sees that the need for massive power stations in the country will be lost for the simple reason that you won't need them when all small towns have 1, 2 or 10 around their periphery feeding the whole of a local area with power, and all connected to the grid and all connected to a service centre which could be 50 miles away, where a travelling service engineer notes that reactor number 27 is going a bit off colour, better shut it down and I'll go in and sort it out tomorrow. So by connecting everyone to the grid, which is the same as it is now, but with a scaled down capacity, you could provide the whole country with a distributed power system, and that avoids the enormous losses through heat in the cabling. So it's a much more efficient distribution system, and of course it's relatively earthquake proof, because if you knocked out 1 or 10, you've still got all the others that you can tap out of. Compared with the ITER tokamak, it's many years away from completion, despite the astronomical amount of money spent on it so far. Each device is expected to cost about £12 billion. And even though its fuel cost will be very low, assuming it can make its own tritium for nothing, the current estimate for it to be powering our grid is 2040. And quite frankly, that's obviously far too late to solve the energy problems the world has now. Well, having thought that Eric Lerner has got the complete answer to our electricity problems or energy shortage, I thought I'd better have a look on the web to see what was happening in the background elsewhere. And something made me to look at cold fusion, which everyone will remember when in 1978, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, who announced to the public and the world press that they had definite proof that fusion was possible at low temperature. And they did it to the press because respectable peer-reviewed journals would not publish it because it was considered impossible and went against the accepted science. They wanted the world to know about it, even if the scientific establishment would prefer to keep it quiet. Well, the media publicised the information enthusiastically. The enormous furore that followed from the scientific community led them to give a premature demonstration before they'd had time to fully understand its characteristics and how to get the best performance out of it. The result was inevitable. The public demonstration failed to show an excess energy. No products of nuclear reactions were found, such as transmutation of metal or the emission of any radiation. Furthermore, other laboratories failed to get any better results when replicating the experiment, and within a few months the subject of cold fusion was a subject to be avoided, a social pariah. The reason was put down variously to incompetence or faulty measurement, and the status of the originators, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, previously highly respected scientists, was irrevocably ruined. But behind the scenes, since then, many researchers had followed the original method, improved it, and shown how it could be made to work both reliably and with a higher output. Even in some universities, professors and their students have followed their instincts and made findings which have been published in lesser journals and more recently on the World Wide Web. And that's where the new science is now being created and given a worldwide peer review under the more acceptable name of low energy nuclear reactions, LNER for short. In the last few months, some of these people have emerged from obscurity and have revealed their work. In fact, when I first looked up cold fusion, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because the web was alive, and I had to go to every day, and there were new findings from other people. I've never seen anything change so rapidly, and that made me realise that giving this paper on this subject was getting me in deep water, because it would be out of date if I didn't follow it every day, and I spent so much time following it every day, I didn't have time to write the paper. So it's anything but finished, and all I'll be ending at today is where we are now. But 2 years from now, it'll be a very different story. Anyway, among those who were stimulated to try their luck with cold fusion experiments, each following their personal hunches on how it might work and how they could stimulate the reaction to give more power, were two people with very different approaches on whom I will now concentrate. Luckily, they're the first two people I found, Since then, there are at least 4 times more who are contenders. And these two were Dr. Randell Mills of Blacklight Power, and more recently Andrea Rossi of the Leonardo Corporation. Dr. Mills, that's him. I'm sure he's not wearing that overall coat anymore, because he's a very wealthy man. That company was formed in 1991 as Hydrocatalysis Inc. In the early days of this development, he was reported to be working with hydrogen, nickel and other catalysts. And he presumed from the changes to some of his chemical elements that fusion was involved. But as his atomic theory and understanding developed over the years, he now claims that his system is not a type of fusion at all, but is based on a new form of hydrogen called the hydrino. As he developed the process, he found he could reliably generate in excess of power in excess of 200 times larger than the power applied. And yet he could find no way, using normal classical quantum physics, to explain his experimental results. And as he wasn't finding X-ray emission or gamma radiation from the reaction, and changes in his catalyst powder combination were producing very unusual materials that he calls hydrino-hydrides, he concluded that his process was inducing the hydrogen electron to change into a lower energy state that was considered impossible in conventional physics. Therefore, as only hydrogen was used in small quantities, or used up in small quantities, he started to investigate the hydrogen itself. It was obviously giving more energy than classical physics would allow, so some parts of classical physics had to be wrong. And this led him to propose a new structure of the atom, with the electron being more in the form of a wave than a particle. That big circular crisscross, it looks like a ball of string, is an illustration of how he sees the orbital pattern of the electron going round in all directions. It's not going right round without having a twist on it, so it's doing a sort of wave winding effect as it goes round. But what he's trying to simulate with that diagram is the diagrams on the bottom, which show that this is something that surrounds the whole nucleus, and yet it has a current pattern, so that those lines on there are not the orbit of an electron, they are the current going in this surrounding shell. And the second from the bottom on the left, that shows different shells, one inside the other. That's electrons or electron current flows in a different shell. And the other diagrams with lots of little arrows on, that's also illustrating it. But it's a highly complex thing, but it shows that the inside of the atoms, as we think of it, is not a solid particle in the form of a nucleus with the usual arrangement with a proton, and the electron is not a little particle around the outside, it's a wave of this particular form that has been misinterpreted in the past in the way standard science does. And the bottom right-hand corner is an illustration of just a ring of energy with a polar direction in it all the time, which is the electron. And so it's a completely different physics that is required. And yet, believe it or not, he's as he's been doing this for many years, he started about 25 or more years ago, and he's now unified the laws of classical physics. And he's gone on from that to use this technology to create some fantastic new materials which do things that we would have considered impossible in the past. That's his grand unified theory of classical physics. 3 books which you can go on your computer and you can download this evening before they get pulled. So I've got copies. I've had a look at the first one, and very, very well explained, right from first principles. But the cover of the second book, that shows the DNA molecule, the DNA structure rather, in the human body. He's used it for chemistry. He can predict on a laptop from his software the performance of chemical combinations you make. He can predict so many things it's just not true. That's his elemental table. You see the normal things at 1, 2, 3, 4, going that way. And you can see the hydrogen at the top left, and you've got various smaller hydrinos, which is hydrogen divided by 2, hydrogen divided by 3 and 4, and all the way up to 137. Maybe when I've read the book I'll know why it's 137 and not 138. But that's what he says it is, and he's obviously got evidence to predict that. And he can find out what it is by exciting these new chemicals he makes and finding out what frequencies he gets from a spectrometer. So he's presumably been able to see spikes on the chart going up to that magic level, which science says is impossible. But astronomers with their special telescopes have actually seen these frequencies in space. And you can see it in some things on Earth as well that accidentally have got the same thing but from natural causes. So it's there, and I'm an experimenter in my work, and if I can make something work and I can prove it, then I know the theory behind it's right. So I don't think he should be told that his theory is nonsense, because he's using his theory. He's developed software that is phenomenal in its impact on the pharmaceutical industry, the plastics industry, and many others. He's forecasting batteries that could give 100 times the power from the same size than we've got now. Light bulbs that will give 10 times or more light for the same current going in. It's phenomenal. He's produced high-power machine designs. That's one typical one. You can see at the top right-hand corner you've got 2 turbines driving a generator, and you get all he's got going in at the beginning. He's got his electrolyzer, he's got his hydrogen H2 supply, and the rest is his special catalytic process. He's not telling anyone what the catalyst is. He predicted it from his own new theory. So anyone else could do the same, or better, if they just use his theory. So he's giving a Bible for the world's future scientists in that unified theory of his. And that's another one, slightly different. And there's his electric car with a CIHT cell drive. And look at the small size of the hydrogen tank he's got in it. And that hydrogen just goes straight into that could be water. I'm not quite sure of that offhand. But that will give enough power to drive a car. And he says that 1 litre of water will drive a car 1,500 miles. That's Andrea Rossi. the Italian entrepreneur, that's a professor of physics at Bologna University, who's been working on the same thing, but teamed up with Andrea Rossi. He's confirming that the catalyzer that he produced, there's an example of it. He's validated that. I only found about Andrea Rossi a month before he had to give a demonstration with his 1 megawatt system on the day, October the 31st last year. And he got a customer that was promising to buy it if he could demonstrate that it worked. He wanted it demonstrated producing 0.5 megawatt of power without any electricity going in at all. But he was allowed the electricity to power up his the control instruments that have to be used with it. But he monitored it in every way. And the customer was in fact an American, a senior army officer who was an expert in this sort of thermal work. And he monitored the process, saw the demonstration, bought it straight away and ordered another 13. And he was charging, I think, $2,000 per kilowatt installed. So multiply that by 1 megawatt, and that's what he got for that. And he got 13. That gave him the money to do what he's done since. He then announced very quick, now ad-libbing, he announced he was going to make a domestic model, 10 kilowatt, for everyone's home to fit to their boilers. And he was going to sell it at an unguaranteed price, but his target price was $500. That's $50 per kilowatt, which compares with £1,000 per kilowatt on a solar system. So he's my sort of man. He's got the right objectives. And he said if he got 10,000 acceptances for this within a short time, he would set up manufacture. He set up manufacture within a month. And the latest I've heard is he's got orders for the whole first year. He's now got 2 factories he's building in America and Europe to make these devices. That's the inside of his reactor, so you can see all the individual 30 kilowatt units he's got inside, all plumbed in together with a common hydrogen supply. But he had a partner who did a bit of a double cross on him from the reports I've heard. And his partner has he thinks, borrowed his technology for the catalyst that he uses, which again he's not saying what it is. And so the partner is now working with the Greek government, who are funding his operations, and he's setting up a Greek factory to make the same thing, but with a slight twist on it.
They haven't got any money.
Well, they're getting enough for this. That's the casework around the current domestic model, which actually goes up to 30 kilowatts. You can have 5, 10, 20, 30, whatever you want. Right, I'm still going to have to buzz forward. I'm going to have to depart from the script and just use the pictures, otherwise we're well out of time. There's another company, these 2 main ones have set up this factory. Blacklight have sold now 8,000 megawatts of power. And my estimate from what I've seen on the web is that they're charging something like 0.5 cent per kilowatt hour from their franchisees, who are the electrical industry, big electrical utilities. And they're re-equipping their power plants with this instead of their old coal burning or gas burning systems. When they've worn out, they just replace it with one of these, which will go on for 30 years. And he gives them the designs so that they build it themselves, so they know all about it, they know the catalyst, but they're not telling anyone, they're not fools. They don't want anyone to know they've got it, because they can't explain why they're putting the price of electricity up when their price they don't follow the price of oil anymore. They've gone way down. So there's a situation of he's effectively been taken over, I think, by the big energy utilities. And they're the only customers he's got. But notice his process: 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, each one emitting power. That sounds very much like Hydrinos to me, which is a different company. This happens to be Brilluin, who only appeared on the web, to me anyway, about a couple of months ago. So I had to add to my lecture and change it to include this. But they had some rather interesting things about it. They were not using catalysts at all. They found another way of doing it. And you can see there, the step 1, pulse and electrons. They're putting a pulse in, an electromagnetic pulse or something. In another drawing altogether, which may be obsolete now, they called it phonons, and that may be a red herring. Step 2, neutrons readily combine with hydrogen ions in the lattice, forming heavier hydrogen. Step 3, hydrogen ions move in the matrix to combine with the newly formed neutrons. Step 4, finally, the hydrogen decays into helium. That's hydrogen 4. It decays into helium, releasing lots of energy. So they've gone 4 steps up the ladder, possibly of hydrinos. And that's the one thing I've noticed in this, that all the people coming out seem to be having slight variations on the theme, but they could all be using exactly the same background theory when it's decided what the right theory is. But these pioneers have all got their own theory and they think theirs is right. They don't want to admit they're using someone else's for commercial reasons.
Tony, I think that's a reasonable summary.
Yeah, so we've probably used the question and answer time, haven't we?
Well, no, there's 5 minutes.
Right, so I'll whistle through the rest of the drawings, there aren't so many of them. Hot tube boiler, that's an example of what goes on inside the Brilluin hot tube system. And that was an early prototype, which looks exactly like Andrea Rossi's ECAT. And there's another one, also Italian, because it seems there's a ring of people in North Italy that got involved. They were all talking to each other, and half of them were professors in universities in Italy, and they were all doing what they shouldn't have been doing, and in their master's time they were doing experiments that were, again, conventional. Yeah, well, we got to the end. Where will this be? I would say in 2 years, 3 of these people will be in the market. The other 2 will probably have dropped out, and the course will be set. Eric Lerner has the chance of being one of the leaders only if he speeds up. I think he's too late because these others have got into the market already. And it's like a salesman's foot in the door. And Andrea Rossi is saying the people who buy his early one, even if it's bettered by the second, he'll give them an updating kit. Presumably it's cheap enough for him to do that. And if he gets that top place, he'll want to keep it, because he's aware that China and Japan will copy the idea, patents or no patents. And he's only got a patent in Italy, which is worthless for a worldwide trade. So I think Andrea Rossi has a good chance of getting to the big time, but my second bet would be Brilluin, and Eric, if he gets the American government to continue the funding they pulled from him and a lot of other people 10 years ago, which was not done anything to do with him, as they decided not to finance NASA for developing energy systems. But NASA have been developing cold fusion themselves. NASA have confirmed that cold fusion is a genuine thing. It's not a scam, it's not against physics, they know it works. It's just physics hasn't found out why. They don't like to admit it. So I think it's going to cause an avalanche effect when this comes out, and they've got to accept generally that all the professionals, the advisors of government, were wrong in saying, do it this way and not that, that's nonsense, it can't work. They're wrong. So the peer review system has got to be overhauled completely to allow this sort of development to surface in good time for the human race to take full advantage of it. So that's going to, and the electric universe theory will probably get rationalised into it for the same reason at the same time. So that's what I'm hoping will happen. But whether it will or not is in the lap of the gods.
But this is for power being used in space travel.
Yes, that's one of the things that Eric Lerner mentions. And he, in fact, did a development project for NASA some time ago. He's reached 1.8 billion degrees in temperature with this system, so he could actually do any of the possible focus fusion reactions that he was asked to do. And an ion engine is one of the things they've looked at. An ion pump is for a spaceship is one of the things that NASA has looked at. And if he produces a 5 megawatt one, then he can produce a bigger one. Well, the present one is only that size. That's all. So make it that size, and it'll go up with the square of the diameter, the power it can produce. So yes, and he says that travel to Mars would be reduced to about 2 months. So yes.
Attempts at assassination by the oil industry.
This whole area is totally fascinating to me. I'm used to looking at odd things, but the things that they're coming out with, that I probably learnt enough that I could actually make a fusion reactor, the low energy one myself, because I've been given far easily enough clues. And the last thing I heard 1 week ago was an Italian high school physics master has actually put one on the web, built with laboratory equipment and with a coefficient of performance of 3, which is, Andrea Rossi's has a coefficient of performance of 6 times the energy going in. But he's done it with 3, but not even using nickel, which all the others have used so far. So, apparently tungsten is what he used. Looks like tungsten nanoparticles. Maybe they were easier for him to get than nickel, because there's probably a short supply of nickel with all the other people using it up at the moment. So if a high school can do it, and they're allowing anyone to tap into their research. They say they're setting up a company, and they want as many people as possible to be shareholders in the company to minimise the chance of it being shut down, because they want this energy to be available and not suppressed, as so many things have been in the past.
Is there one last question?